We get to talk about one of my favorite adjustments, and that is gradient maps. It's a quick way to add a little bit of cool to your photos. So this is a brick picture I took when I was out walking around. And I love taking photos with my phone so I can grab textures that I can use on any type of background or design work. But it needs a little bit of work. So what I want to do is I want to add text on top of it and put a quote. So let's say I get my text tool and I click once and I type in a headline. I'm just quickly typing in a little quote and using Dido, which is a really nice serif typeface. And you can instantly tell when you have such a high contrast photo and you have type, it's kind of hard to read the type. And that's going to be the case for a lot of photography you find online. You're going to want to put a quote or a type on top of a photo, and it's going to be really, really hard to read the typography or the quote. So one thing you can do is you can lower the contrast of your background image so that the type can be more readable. And one way to do that is with gradient maps. And it's a great way to kind of demonstrate what this does. So I'm going to go ahead and double click, and I'm going to make this text white. And I'm going to select my background image. Go ahead and double click and unlock that. And I'm going to go up to my adjustments panel and I'm going to add a gradient map. So this is what a gradient map does. So I can go ahead and customize this. I can click anywhere on this gradient map area and it's going to bring up a gradient editor. And I'm going to quickly shift to a different photo so you can see the other one is going to be a little bit harder to demonstrate gradient maps. But I'm going to use the gradient map on this photo. Click on gradient map. And this is what a gradient map does. So these are your highlights over here, and these are your shadows. So everything that is a shadow in this photo, you can click right here on the color, and you can change it. So instead of whatever it was before, which is black, you can actually change the color on it. So let's do a highly saturated blue. And then all of the highlight colors, you can change the colors on that. So let's do a highly saturated red. So you can see how one side is blue. All these pixels that were darker are now blue, and all the pixels that were highlights are now red. You can reverse the two. So let's go ahead and reverse the two. And you can see how all the highlights are red and the shadows are blue. What makes this interesting is you can also change midtones too. So let's kind of switch this back to how it was. That kind of, those blues kind of naturally are more shadows than the reds. What's really powerful about this, you can actually do midtones too and add a third color. And all your midtones can be its own color. But what you can do is you can easily make this monochromatic too. So let's say these are your darker colors and these are your lighter colors. I can make all of the lighter pixels a similar blue. And it looks like you can't see anything because they're both blue now. So your highlights and shadows are all the same color. So I'm going to take the highlights but make this a lighter color. So you can easily do kind of this monochromatic look very quickly by using gradient maps. You can also make this darker. So make your shadows darker. So just moving along the hue picker and adding more black. And I can go over here and add more white. I can also even go up the hue slider and add maybe a little bit of purple in here. So you could do two lighter colors to make it really soft. So both of these are pretty high up in lightness. Or you can make it really dark and bring out shadows. So this is just fantastic to play around with. And there's a bunch of pre-made presets as well. So you have some basics, which is just kind of be a black and white. You have blues, which some of these are reversed, so it looks a little bit silly. So that one, for example, you have all of your highlights dark and your lights light, so it's going to look a little creepy. But that's an easy fix if you find one that has the reverse, where you have your shadows as the darkest color. So let's say, for example, this one, where you have kind of the darkest color here and the lightest color on the right. That makes the most sense in this situation. So let's switch back to our brick photo. We want to make this monochromatic so we can make this background photo low contrast so the type can be high contrast against the brick. So here we are. We can customize this. We can use some presets that they have, or we can do our own, which is what we're going to do. We can go to basics, select black and white. So let's make it kind of this deep, rich blue brick. So we're going to select all of the shadows, all the dark shadows in this photo. We're going to go to color and let's do a highly saturated blue. Let's make it a little bit darker. And we're going to take all of our highlights, make it a highly saturated blue, but make it lighter. And we can go back and make this a little bit darker, just to give it a little bit more of a contrast and punch, but not so much to overwhelm. So see how that type is a lot more readable. Once again, making adjustments to this. There's also midtones you can add in the middle. Change all your midtones to a specific color, which can have some really interesting effects. But let's stick with blue so it can remain monochromatic. And that just gives us ultimate control over how this looks. So you can still see the texture, but the type is the main event here. So now we can finesse this typography. I can go to my properties panel and I can scroll down all the way down here. Let's make it a nice center alignment. Let's also make it all caps. So I'm down here in type options, making it all caps and adding a little bit more leading or spacing between the sentences. Right now it's 248. This is a pretty big document for it to be 248 because my point size for my typography is 304. So this is probably a pretty large document because this is the original photo that I took. So it's probably like 4,000. If I go down here, I'm right. 3,000 by 4,000 pixels is the size of this photo. So let's go ahead and change that, make it a little bit bigger. So instead of 248, maybe 260. Just adding a little spacing, maybe a little bit more, maybe 280. There we go, just kind of letting those lines breathe a little bit. So let's break this typography up a little bit. Type is more readable with, and I'm just doing, just pressing return, just doing a physical line break. Type is more readable with high contrast. We can add even more spacing. Let's try 360 or maybe even 440, just making it nice big wide gaps. That's a little too much. It's always give or take. Trying to figure it out. Just getting my move tool, unselecting. And that's great because now I can use this texture. I can show that through in the photo and still have the typography be very readable. And that was the whole point of using gradient maps. Just one way, one method you could do to use something in the background that adds an element to the design, but never takes away from the readability of the document. We can stylize this a little more. I have Dido, but what if we did an italicized Dido? So let's do italic. Adds a little more flair of style, a little more elegance. And I love contrast in my type as well. So instead of just this big block of white text, let's take readable, which is probably the most important word, and let's do something that is a high contrast against blue on the color wheel. That's usually yellows, golds. So let's try to find a gold. So I'm right here between my yellows and oranges, kind of right in the middle. I'm going to be able to find a gold. So gold is not orange. Gold has a little bit of gray in it. So it's going to be somewhere here in the hue slider, but I want to make it bright enough to really pop out.